Hi there, welcome back to CSEC English B Paper 2 Solutions with Miss Atherley. Today we will be focusing on section C, prose fiction. The prose fiction section is a bit different from sections A and B because you are given 4 choices. 5 and 6 are based on the novels and 7 and 8 are based on the 10 stories from A World of Prose for CSEC. I would advise you to read all questions before deciding which one to answer. Today we will be focusing on question number 8 and it's taken from the May 2019 paper. You may pause the video to read it carefully. So, like you have seen before if you've been with me for a while, the first step is to break the question down. I choose to do this by highlighting the different parts of the question. There are always going to be 3 main parts you have to discuss, and if you miss one of them, you risk getting a bad mark. So this is a good technique to use. You can also underline, circle, label. Just make sure that you can distinguish between the 3 main parts of that question. So next, we must break it down. We must work on our organization. Firstly, do you understand what you're being asked to do? Read the first sentence carefully. It says, from the prescribed list, choose 2 stories you have studied in which there is a struggle against social injustice. Next, what do you have to do? You must focus on this theme in 2 stories. And unlike question 7, you have to choose those 2 stories yourself. So here you have a little more independence. Once you have understood that, you move on to the next sentence. For each story, describe how this injustice is demonstrated. And finally, discuss the impact, discuss the impact of injustice on an individual or the community. And then the last part will always be the same. It's going to ask you to focus on the technique. So it says, you must examine how the writer portrays injustice to highlight its impact. Make sure you know your techniques. This part is always going to ask you about the techniques. Right, so before we move on, let's speak a little bit about social injustice because we have to understand what it is or we won't be able to write about it. So, according to Merriam-Webster 2016, it is a situation in which the rights of a person or group of people are ignored. So what issues are we talking about here? We have racism, discrimination, inequality, institutional bureaucracy, poverty. And I'm sure that you can think of some others. If you can type them in the comments. So let's choose our stories. Now that we understand what that question is about a little more. There are 10 stories which you should have read. Some stories are different depending on when you are writing the exam. The stories in green will not be used in 2023. But if you are writing the exam this year, you have to learn them. If you're writing the exam in 2023 and beyond, you will not be focusing on Blackout, Emma, the boy who loved ice cream, or the day the world almost came to an end. Instead, they've been replaced by Raymond's Run, Georgia and Them, Their United States, Mint Tea, and What Happened. So let's think. I am sure that we can think of many stories which deal with the struggle against social injustice. For poverty, I chose Mom Luby and the Social Worker and the Man of the House, but I'm sure that you can think of others. Discrimination against traditional practices, you have the 2 grandmothers, to Dada in Memoriam. Inequality, we have 2 stories here. Racism, Berry and Blackout. So I decided to go with racism, and I'll be focusing on Berry and Blackout. Now to the fun part. Let's organize our ideas. And this is something you should do before beginning to write your essay. Organize your thoughts in advance, not while you are writing. So in the middle, I have written struggle against social injustice because this is the main theme of our essay, right? Here are the 3 aspects I must focus on. So I'm going to write them around the cloud. Now this is just one method of organization. Your teacher might have taught you others. You can do the one which you find most comfortable. This one is my favorite. I still use it today. Right, so I'm going to focus on each one now. We're looking at how this injustice is demonstrated. In Barry, Milbury is treated as inferior because of the color of his skin. He is exploited and disrespected. And again, if you don't remember these stories, you can read them over, or you can actually check YouTube. There are recordings of the stories right here. The next one, in Blackout, the thoughts of the white American woman demonstrate that she comes from a racist society which views white people as superior. And then we look at the impact of this injustice on an individual or the community. So that's the second part. I've chosen an individual, so I'm going with Barry. He is eventually left without a job. Social immobility. He cannot move forward no matter how hard he tries, simply because of his race. Isn't that terrible? And finally, the techniques. Now, CXC will word this differently every time, but in most cases, the last section is always going to ask you about the techniques. So how the writer portrays injustice to highlight its impact. In Barry, we have irony. In Blackout, we have contrast. Of course, when we write our essay, we are going to elaborate a little more on those. Right, so keep in mind that you should write at least 5 paragraphs. You have your introduction, part 1, which tackles the first part of the question. If you are writing about 2 stories here, you may want to divide that into 2 paragraphs and end up with a 6-paragraph essay. That's fine. If you want to put them together, that's also fine. So how this injustice is demonstrated. Part 2, the impact of this injustice on an individual or the community. Part 3, the techniques. And then you have your conclusion. Of course, you must conclude your essay. So next step, write. And then you must proofread. Have you made any errors? Did you dot your I's, cross your T's? Did you leave anything out? Did you add any irrelevant information? Have you made simple spelling errors? It happens to the best of us, so you must proofread. I'm sure that even the Prime Minister, the President, wherever you're watching from, whatever leader your country has, they proofread their speeches as well. And you're a student at this stage, so this is definitely a step you cannot leave out. So ta-da, this is what our completed essay looks like. As you can see, we have 5 paragraphs, just like we discussed. I will go through each part in the next few slides so you can see how we elaborate on each point. So first we have our introduction. And I have said this in every video, you need to mention every part of the question in the introduction. This is also the order you will use to discuss the different parts. So let's see what we have. And I will just read through the entire essay, but feel free to pause whenever you want. The struggle against social injustice, in particular racism, is a central theme throughout the stories Barry and Blackout. Barry focuses on the unfair and cruel treatment faced by a black man in a predominantly white society, while Blackout illustrates the racist mentality of a white American woman in the West Indies. Without a doubt, the impact of this racism is negative. The writers of both stories use various techniques to portray injustice and to highlight its impact. The main character in Barry is Milbury Jones, a young black man who has been struggling to find employment. From the beginning, readers are made aware that the society in which he lives is incredibly racist. Mrs. Osborne is initially hesitant to hire him because of his race. She does not allow him to share the same living quarters as the other workers because she is not sure how they would react to having to share a space with a black person. When discussing payment, it becomes obvious that Dr. Renfield is also racist. He says that since the previous worker was paid $10 a week, the darky would be paid 8. The other workers in the house keep overwhelming Milbury with their own tasks, but he accepts because he knows that his race will make it difficult for him to find another job. These same adults tease him about his accent and his color. In Blackout, a white American woman appears to be intimidated and disturbed by a black man's presence. Readers are given insight into her thoughts, which highlight her negative feelings towards being approached by him. He asks her for a light for his cigarette, and she is reluctant to help him. After he uses her cigarette to light his, she flicks it away in disgust. He expresses his displeasure, which seems to surprise her. She thinks, in America, they lynched them for less than that. He reminds her that they are not in America and are not living in a society which is divided by race or where she is given special privileges. So this part tackles part 1, describe how this injustice is demonstrated. Once we have done this, we are able to move on to the next part, discussing the impact of injustice on an individual or the community, and I said I was going with Berry. So let's go. The impact of this injustice on Berry is negative. Due to racism, Berry is underpaid and overworked. Dr. Renfield refers to him as a careless black rascal after a child accidentally loses his balance and falls. Dr. Renfield is more concerned about a broken chair and negative publicity for the home than his good-natured, honest, and loving employee. After the incident, Berry is fired and his pay is withheld. It is clear that racism has resulted in social immobility. As a black man, he will probably be mistreated by every white employer, and it will be difficult for him to make career and financial advancements. Now we move on to part 3. What are the techniques? How does the writer portray injustice? The writers of both stories creatively portray injustice to highlight its impact. In Berry, Langston Hughes uses irony. The only trustworthy character is treated like a criminal simply because of his race, while those who perceive themselves to be pure are dishonest and cruel. In Blackout, contrast is used to highlight the differences between the white woman and the black man. The difference between the West Indian society and the racist American society is also highlighted. Don't forget your conclusion. So we are ending now. Both Berry and Blackout include characters who face the harmful effects of social injustice. Berry may never be able to advance in society because he is black, and the white American woman in Blackout may never come to terms with the fact that her skin color does not make her superior to black people. The writer's creative use of literary devices emphasizes their displeasure with the issue. So here you must simply state your main points again in a different way to close your argument. Easy, right? If not, just continue watching, continue doing your past paper questions until it becomes second nature. So, next week we would like to continue with prose fiction. However, we'll be looking at a novel. This question is taken from the January 2020 paper, and it focuses on breath, eyes, memory. You can write the essay and email it if you would like. I will post the email address in the description box below. And that is all for now. See you next time. Thanks for stopping by.